As the relationship between America and South Africa continued to deteriorate, and now with countries like Canada, as well as the economic region of Europe, starting to play the tariff game, South Africa and many supporters of the ANC and the EFF are starting to look to China to pick up the slack, thinking that, well, if we can't trade with America because America isn't happy with the way that we have allowed trade to happen, then we'll just trade with other countries. We'll find China. They will help us out. The flaw in that thinking is imagining that the Chinese are good natured and that the Chinese genuinely want to help. Say what you will about the Americans as well as the Europeans, but they have been giving South Africa a lot of free money for very many decades in order to basically keep the ANC in power. The Chinese don't like free money, especially when you look around the world at the Belt and Road Initiative. You find that whenever countries get into bed with China, China goes for the throat. The way to think of China is a country that cares only about itself. You see, for a very long time, China has had the one China policy. The policy is many things to many people in China, but effectively, it puts China front and center to everything that the Chinese do. They want to bring Taiwan back into the Chinese motherland, so to speak. And effectively, China has never been a country throughout history that have looked past its own borders. It has always been the victim of invasions as well as conquering tribes. It has rarely ever gone out of its own border to conquer others. That is something that actually bodes pretty well for the Chinese. But it also means that the Chinese doesn't really think about the well-being of anyone around them. They really only care about themselves. They view China as a sort of holy land. It is more holy than any other land. There is no other China, and therefore China doesn't care about any other nation, not really. And you might be asking yourself, well, Stefan, what's the point of all of this? Well, the point is this. China is starting to make headway into South Africa. It has been going for quite some time, and the South African government has slowly but surely been selling off a lot of businesses in South Africa to the Chinese. A lot of our own manufacturing, like, for example, long steel, and now we find out, a lot of other metals have come under a lot of pressure as a result of the ANC effectively making the borders open to all Chinese steel, all Chinese metals, and it's killing the manufacturing in South Africa at home base. But the Chinese don't care. Of course they don't. And the ANC doesn't care because I think the Chinese pays them really, really well. The newest project, however, is that of the Chinese car giant BYD, now planning to install over 300 electric vehicle charging stations in the country. A very interesting thing about these is the exact funding model for this is completely unknown. We know that BYD has a contract with Eskom to install these and also to build some solar farms and stuff to help power these, although it will be a combination of grid power and solar power that will power these charging stations. As for the rest of it, we can only guess. Now, if it follows as any of the other Belt and Road initiatives or any of the other investment initiatives from China, then it will look something like this. Some of it will be funded by China through what they call a loan to the sovereign nation. So South Africa will make a loan from the Chinese, and then the other half of it, or sometimes up to 40% of it, will go through what is effectively called a joint venture account, where China will own anywhere from 50 to 70% of the joint venture account. But ultimately, what that boils down to is that the host nation owes China a lot of money. And what exactly happens when you owe China that much money? Well, Sri Lanka might be a good place to start. The Hambanontauta, or however the hell you pronounce that name, port that was built by Beijing, a specific company, Chinese, of course, for Sri Lanka. In spite of the fact that almost every single independent feasibility study said, yeah, this isn't going to work. There's literally no shipping lanes anywhere near Sri Lanka. Why would you need this? They forged ahead. Or we could look at the world's emptiest international airport, again in Sri Lanka. Again, an airport that is situated near nothing. And no one would ever want to go there because, well, there's nothing really there to go to. And there's very few people leaving from there. Of course, all of this was funded wholly by China through loans to Sri Lanka. When all of that went completely belly up, Sri Lanka had to default on their debts, with China then renegotiating the debt. They still owe it, they still have to pay it, but there has at least been some renegotiations. And of course, we had one of the worst, I would say, protest movements the world has seen in very recent history. Yes, Sri Lanka's president was forced to flee the country as a result of China's debt crisis. And it was China that created that debt crisis because ultimately, China doesn't care. You can look, for example, to Southeast Asia, in Indonesia. China has caught Indonesia in a debt trap of its own with high-speed railways that go nowhere, for no purpose and no reason. And of course, the way China convinces these governments that, hey, we're a good country to go in bed with is a lot of money. And China makes it seem like this money is mostly free. Like, you just take the money and they'll build the stuff and hopefully someone will use it. Again, in this railways case, you have individual independent feasibility studies that show, hey, there's not enough people that would want to use this railway, but the government goes, hey, this is a lot of money. Let's go with this. And China doesn't care because if you owe them that money, you are going to pay it back. We could look at Zambia. Zambia is in itself in a massive debt crisis, again, as a result of China. And here, we don't even have time to go through all of the projects that the Chinese built there. And some of those projects were billions of dollars for things that the Zambian economy not only isn't ready for, cannot utilize, but would be from day one a complete and utter drag on the economy. The point here is simple. And it's not the only countries. These are just a few of the 75 countries that have gone into business with China, and all of them have struggled severely. The only reason a lot of them have not gone into debt crises is because they still have some money. Their economies are still relatively good. But even the Europeans who have the Chinese building mega projects in Europe have since closed the door and said, hell no. That's enough. We'll just do without this. Because the Chinese just don't care. And the fact that South Africa is allowing China this free access, by the way, BYD said very openly they have no plans on building their vehicles in South Africa. So that means we're getting no benefit. These cars will come into South Africa from China. We'll buy them, the money will leave our shores and go back to China. The power stations or the charging stations that they will build, yes, the Chinese famously use all of their own materials. So you take out the loan from the Chinese, then you commit to buying all of the materials and all of the technology from the Chinese in order to build the thing. The Chinese send their own workers to build the thing, and then when you can't pay it back, you give it to the Chinese and it becomes theirs, and you go into a debt crisis. Now, I'm not saying that doing business with the Americans or with the Europeans is without risk. It's always risk because every country is only ever looking out for themselves. And the Chinese are no different. The only real difference is that it's very rare that countries will go into business with the Americans or with the Europeans and this cause a debt crisis. When it comes to the Chinese, they genuinely don't care. They will rip out your throat and beat you to death with it, and then just take the money and walk away happy. Because ultimately, it is for China only about China. The CCP does not care about any other nation on earth. Ladies and gentlemen, as always, if you like, hit the like button. If you dislike, hit the dislike button. It is, of course, free of charge. Then slap that subscribe button because we're making our way to 50K, and I would love for you to be part of that. Massive shout out and thank you to all of the patrons and YouTube channel members that continue to support this channel, making videos like this one possible. As always, you can become a patron by hitting the link in the description down below or hit the join button right below this video. I will see all of you in the next one. Peace.